established. And then he comments, without initiation by a bona fide spiritual master, the actual connection with Krishna consciousness is never performed. So you can understand how important and how sacred these vows of initiation are. They're just not some incidental ceremony. And it was very wonderful to see there was a total of 33 people getting first and some getting second, some getting first and second, you know. So it was a wonderful occasion. So in January of 1965, finally Srila Prabhupada had finished the first 3 volumes of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It was in 3 parts. Now it's like one major volume. But he had that manuscript complete. He had the money to print it. Money had been donated in part by the same person who gave him passage on the Jalaga. And to get that book printed, he didn't have a team. He had himself. And so he was entering into the world of printing, had to purchase paper. And that was not a little thing. The paper was under ration, because at that time it was the World War II. So paper was rationed. The government had, the control. So you had to go through that obstacle, as we say nowadays, obstacles. Purchase the paper, and then he had to correct all the proofs. And he had to keep the printer on schedule so that the book would be finished by January 65. And he had his vision set on the West. And he felt now he was prepared. He had something concrete to offer the people of the West. Like he could have just come, but, maybe make a few little posters or little handbills. But he had been advised by a person who he didn't even know, but he had been making printed out back to Godheads, but mimeograph type. He had made different little brochures. He was passing them out, trying to get the attention of people in India. And one person pointed out to him that if you have something like that, it's like a newspaper, you read it and you toss it. Even if it's good information, it's not valued. You should print books. And that is exactly what his spiritual master had told him when they met for the second time in Radhakund. And he said, if you get money, print books. So he commented, I planned that I must go to America. And generally, people from India, if they're leaving, they go to London. He said, but I didn't want to go to London. I was simply thinking how to get to New York. He said, I was scheming whether I should go this way through Tokyo, Japan, or that way, which way is cheaper. And that was what he was considering. And he said, sometimes I was dreaming that I had come to New York. So his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, had sent disciples to London in the 1800s. And he actually financed them. Like when we were sent to London, we just had a one-way ticket. That was it. No credit cards. I don't even know if they were existing at that point, but we certainly didn't have any. So he sent his disciples. There were sannyasis. He was bankrolling, you could say, but he didn't accomplish anything substantial. There was no mutt, no temple was established, not even a reading room. So Prabhupada was thinking, if I'm going to fail, let it be somewhere else. So he didn't want to go to London. So then he met Mr. Agarwal, who was a Mathura business person. he was on the street passing out his pamphlets, and as he did to everybody he spoke to, he mentioned that he wanted to go to the West and preach. And even though this Mr. Agarwal had only known him for the few minutes, it's only a quick little conversation. You hand something, person takes it, you speak something, and then you move on. But he did mention to me he wanted to go to the West. And Mr. Agarwal surprised him by saying he volunteered to get him a sponsor, and he explained that he had a son in Butler, Pennsylvania. And his son had sponsored other sadhus to come, and guess what? None of them ever came. So he said his son could, the Hindu culture was, your son will do something to please the father. So basically, the son had no interest in extending spiritual life, but he had an interest to please his father. So in that way, he volunteered his help, and Srila Prabhupada urged him to do so. But he realized he couldn't just dream about going to the West. He also needed some Lakshmi, some money. So in March of '65, he again went to Bombay, and he was attempting to sell his books. And even though at that point people were still more on a pious platform, the West, the mindset of the West was creeping in. So religious books weren't such a high priority for people anymore. So he was staying at this free dharamshala. So how many people here, who doesn't know what a dharamshala is? Okay, so a dharamshala is a very basic place. You can't compare it to a hotel. And he was staying in a free one, which means that was, I'll give you an idea because I used to stay in these dharamshalas sometime. There cement room, cement floor, a water tap coming out with a little hole for the drainage. That was it. Maybe there would be another little room to the next door, and you could go in there and do things privately. Otherwise, that was it. You brought your own lock. If you wanted to lock your door, you brought your own lock. So he's staying. Here is the future. Jagat Guru, Srila Prabhupada, who is destined to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, and he's staying in this free dharamshala, Prem Kutir, and trying to find customers for his books, and it was difficult. And he met a librarian from Jai Hind College, and he purchased the books because the college had a library. And then he was trying to take Prabhupada around trying to find interest. So it wasn't really panning out too lucratively, and he returned to Delhi, pursuing the normal avenues of trying to sell books and looking for whatever opportunity could possibly arrive. And then he got a message from the Ministry of External Affairs. And he was informed that his no objection certificate for going to the US was ready. So in those days, things were a little more complicated as far as travel in and out of India. So the first thing was you had a no objection certificate. You weren't some kind of sleazy criminal or hardcore criminal, no objection. And Prabhupada hadn't applied, so he was like, can you show me who signed this? And they showed, it's called a statutory declaration form, and it was signed by Mr. Gopal Agarwal of Butler, Pennsylvania. And he solemnly declared he would bear the expense of Bhaktivedanta Swami's stay in America. So in order for him to do that formality, he had to get a form from the Indian consulate in New York. He had to obtain a certificate from his employer certifying that his monthly salary, whatever it was, and he had to get a letter from his bank showing his balance as of April of '65. And then it had to be notarized, stamped, approved, and sent to Delhi. All that got done, and now Prabhupada had a sponsor, but he still needed a passport, a visa, and a P form, and the travel fare. By June 10th, So we're up to April now, it's, June, skip May, I guess we were like, still working on things. June 10th, he had his passport. And for his address, he put Hare Krishna Temple in Chippewa, Delhi, which was where he had been staying. And for his father's name, Gaur Mohan Day. And then he asked this person, Krishna Pandit, who'd been assisting him, if he would pay for his, travel to go abroad. But there were two reasons he refused. One was, Krishna Pandit thought it was against the Hindu principles for a sadhu to go abroad. And secondly, it was very expensive. So he had the passport, he had sponsored paper, the ship, and he went again to Bombay to secure a ticket. And again, he was approaching Srimati Sumati Morarji, who was the owner and you could say CEO of the Scindia Steams company. She actually, at the age of 20, became involved in upper level administration with the organization, which was before that managed by her father. So she was quite astute. And his secretary, she had a secretary, Mr. Choksi, he goes, now that Swami from Vrindavan is back again, because he tried before. And he's published a book with your donation, he has a sponsor, he has a passport, he wants to go to America, he wants you to send him on a Scindia ship. And her reply was, Swami's too old. He's too old to go to the United States and expect to accomplish anything. And so he goes back, he tells that to Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, and Prabhupada was like shaking his head like disapprovingly, like when you hear something you don't want to hear, And then he starts telling him, here's how you should say it. Go back and tell her this, tell her that, and he tries again and it wasn't working. And, he's telling her and she goes, the Swami's not healthy, it's too cold there. He might not be able to get back. What could he even do there? Here we are, what could he even do there? The people in America are not too cooperative. And they'll probably not even listen to him. So Srila Prabhupada got a little exasperated and he demanded a personal interview, and he was granted that interview, and he was very determined. He presented his request really emphatic, and please give me one ticket. Swamiji, you're so old. You're taking this responsibility. Do you think it's right? And he just was, he was lifting his hand as if, like if you have your kid and you're trying to assure the kid it's okay, so it's like here's his doubting daughter. It's all right, it will be fine. And then she still fires back, but you know what my secretaries are thinking? Swami's going to die there. And then he just made this dismissive face again, insisting, give me a ticket. And finally she's, all right, get your P form and I'll make arrangements to send you by our ship. And even that took a little while, I'll explain. So the P form, this was another necessity for, I don't think you have this at all anymore, but at that time, if you wanted to leave the country, it's a certificate given by the State Bank of India to certify that that person has no excessive debts. There's no, nothing that he's running away from. And it's cleared by the bank, and it would take a while to obtain. And also, we still needed his visa. So these had to go through government permissions, and that meant staying in Bombay, and he had no place to stay. He'd formerly had spent so much time there, he had no place to stay, so Srimati Morarji agreed to let him reside at the Scindia colony. And that was a compound of apartments for the people that worked for the Scindia company. So he was in a small unfurnished apartment, only his trunk and his typewriter, one of these ching 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 boom, ching ching boom, and then you have to change the ribbon and your fingers get all black. So when he wasn't going out trying to introduce his book, trying to convince people of the need of Krishna consciousness, he'd be sitting and working, typing, and the people of the colony could see this is a special person. He's a sadhu. He's a scholar. The wife of one of the office workers there commented to Prabhupada, every time I passed, he would be writing or chanting, and she'd say, Swamiji, what are you writing? So one day he gave her 2 books. He goes, child, if you read this book, she's the only one. So, child, if you read this book, you will understand. So, he'd come home, he'd be out all day, he would be exhausted, and then he was notice he would just sit in the chair for a minute, and actually he would sit in the windowsill, looking really exhausted. And suddenly he'd sit up and he's just like start in working again. And sometimes they would ask, did you have any good contacts today? Not so much today. I didn't get much. Just depressing. But tomorrow, Krishna will give me more details. So he had a printed page entitled My Mission. And that was he was using as an introduction to influential men trying to get further finances for further sets of the Bhagavatam. And in that little pamphlet, it was proposed that God consciousness is the only remedy for the evils of modern materialistic society. And despite scientific advancement and material comforts, there's no peace in this world. Something we notice even more today. In Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the glory of India, this is how he described the glory of India, must be spread all over the world. So his backing by Scindia and his sponsorship in the U.S. were a strong presentation. And with the help of Scindia, he got his visa. So that's July 28th, 1965, the visa came. But the P form, the cursed P form proceeding went slowly. And it even threatened to sabotage the whole, the whole project. And Prabhupada explained that formerly there was no restriction for going outside for a sannyasi. But he had so much problem from the government to get out. He had applied and no sanction was coming, so he personally went to the State Bank of India, which I found out is still operational, And the officer there, Mr. Martachari, told him, Swamiji, you are sponsored by a private person. If you were sponsored by an institution, we could consider, but you're sponsored by a private man, so we cannot accept. And if after 1 month you're in difficulty there'll be so many obstacles. That Prabhupada was just ready to go. And he was exasperated. What have you done? And he said, I have decided not to sanction your P form. Prabhupada replied, no, don't do this. Send me to your superior. It should not be like this. It was, you could say, adamant. So he took the request, he got the file, he took it into what they Prabhupada described him as the supreme man in the State Bank of India. And he asked the secretary, do you have a such and such file? So he kindly give it to Mr. Rao. So the secretary agreed. Prabhupada is sitting there waiting, and Mr. Rao came personally. And he said, Swamiji, I've passed your case. Don't worry. So, yay. So now, the only delay would be a date of departure. He had 500 copies of the small pamphlet and was held the 8 verses of Shastaksham, along with the advertisement for the Bhagavatam, in context of an advertisement for this India steamship company. And like, when will I get my seat on, my place on the ship? And the reason it took a delay was because she wanted to make sure that he'd have a captain. She had several ships. She wanted to make sure that she had a captain who understood the needs of a vegetarian and a Brahmana. So finally it was decided, so she told the captain, Arun Pandya, to carry extra vegetables and fruits for the Swami. And then Mr. Chokshi, that same secretary, spent the last 2 days with Prabhupada in Bombay and picked up the pamphlets for the press, purchased some warm clothing because, he was leaving one climate for another, and he drove him to the station to catch the train for Calcutta. So he had about 2 weeks before the Jalagita departed in Calcutta. And although he had lived much of his life in the city, now he is, a sannyasi. Anybody here not know what a sannyasi? Okay, so a sannyasi is somebody who's taken vows of renunciation of material life. And so he had nowhere to stay. So he had lived much of his life, and he had written this beautiful poem, Vrindavan Bhajana. And one of the passages there, I have my wife, my sons, daughters, grandsons, everything, but I have no money, so they are a fruitless glory. Even though he had been so carefully nurtured as a child, those days are gone forever. And he wrote, where have my loving mother and father gone now? And where are all my elders who are my own folk? Who will give me news of them? Tell me, who? All that is left of this family is a list of names. Something we can all consider as we go on in our life. So out of the hundreds of people that Prabhupada knew in Calcutta, he called upon this Shishya Bhattacharya, who was a very flamboyant kirtanir singer. He had met him about a year prior at the governor's house in Lucknow. And this Bhattacharya, he wasn't a relative, he wasn't a disciple, he wasn't even a close friend, but he was willing to help. So Prabhupada went right to his place. He informed him he would be leaving on such and such a date, he needed a place to stay, and he would like to give some lectures in the meantime. And Bhattacharya, he immediately began to make private meetings and programs in friends' homes, and he would sing, and Prabhupada would then speak. So then the Bhattacharya had this idea, this should be new, this is newsworthy. And he was going around to the local papers. Nobody was like taking a bite, as we can say, nobody was picking up on it. The Statesman, the Bazar Patrika, the Juganaths. So then they went to this one, Dainik Basumati, so it was a local Bengali daily paper, and they agreed to print an article and post Prabhupada's Bhaktivedanta Swami's picture. So a week before his departure, he traveled back to Mayapur to visit the Samadhi of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his guru, take his blessings again for the mission he was about to embark on. And he went to Srivasangam. Srivasangam is where the Kirtan party started, Kirtan of Lord Chaitanya. And he used to go there as a grihastha, and he would sit in the back of the temple and chant very intensely. And this had been noticed by the Pujari. So on this particular day, now he's there, it's been a really long time, and he's dressed in the saffron color of a sadhu, of a sannyasi. And suddenly that pujari, he's looking how intent that person was chanting, and it reminded him of his friend who would sit, in the back in the white, and then he realized it was the same person. So he went up, and then Prabhupada asked for his blessings. He said, my spiritual master is sending me on an impossible mission to go to the West, where they have no information about Radha and Krishna. So as the day of his departure approached, he Prabhupada took stock of his meager personal possessions, one suitcase, an umbrella, a little supply of dried cereal, because he didn't know what would he find to eat in America. Perhaps there would only be meat. And actually there was some truth in that, because vegetarianism had not reached the mainstream, and it was considered with suspicion. I can tell you that for a fact. Vegetarian, maybe you're a communist. They were thinking you were not maybe a correct person. Now you can go anywhere. But he didn't know, so he was prepared, he said, to live on boiled potatoes and cereal. So when the day, and he had his 200 volume set, 200 copies of the, 3 volumes in one set. And just having those books gave him confidence. And when the day of departure came, he needed that confidence because he was making a momentous break with his previous life. He was old, It was described he was dangerously old. And he was not in good health. To be poor, to be unknown in India was one thing. If you were a sadhu, you would be cared for. Even in the Kali Yuga days when India leaders were rejecting Vedic culture and imitating the West, still, there were some remains of the Vedic civilization. So as a sadhu, he had been to see billionaires, he'd seen governors, prime ministers, simply by showing up at the door and waiting. The sannyas was respected. The Bhagavatam was respected, but in America, it would be different. He would be known, and he would be a foreigner. There was no tradition of sadhus, there would be no temples, no free ashrams, but then he'd remember the books, his transcendental knowledge in English, and he would feel very confident. So when he met someone in America, he would give the flyer, Srimad Bhagavatam, India's message of peace and goodwill. So in August 13th, just a few days before the Janmashtami, the next day would be his 69th birthday. So August 13th, 65, the ship set sail. And the reason, there was a tradition among the Hindus that you would never leave the sadhus, they would never leave the shore of Bharatvarsha. And if they were in Vrindavan, you would definitely not leave Vrindavan, you would die there. And that was considered glorious, the perfection of life. And here was a sannyas leaving the shores of Bharatvarsha, crossing the ocean for the land of the Malechas. But beyond all of that, there was the desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and his desire was none different from the desire of Lord Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Krishna himself, had declared, he had dictated, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra would be known in every town and village of the world. There were very few people at the port where he departed. officials mostly. His son Vrindavan Day came, and he again checked his essentials, your passenger ticket, your passport, your visa, the P form, the sponsor's address, and a Bengali copy of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which he had time to read and did read during the crossing. And Prabhupada explained, it was with great difficulty that he got out of the country. I had described that. He said, but somehow or other, by Krishna's grace, I got out so I could spread Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. For thousands of years, Krishna Bhakti had only been known inside India, not outside, except in maybe some twisted, faithless reports by foreigners. And the only swamis who did make it to America were non-devotees. They were Mayavadis and personalists. So now, for the first time, Krishna was sending Bhaktivedanta Swami as his emissary. He was 69 when he boarded, and in a few days it was Janmashtami, and he celebrated that Janmashtami on board the ship. And the whole, the captain came, his wife came, all the other people came who were the attendants on the ship, and Prabhupada spoke. And the next day was his birthday, which was not noted. He didn't make any big issue about it. He commented, today the ship is flying very smoothly. I feel better today because he had some seasickness. I feel better today. But I'm feeling separation from Sri Vrindavan and my lords, Sri Govinda, Gopinath, and Radha Damodar. My only solace is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, in which I'm tasting the nectarian of Lord Chaitanya's Leela. I have left Bharat Bhumi just to execute the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in pursuance of Lord Chaitanya's order. In other words, this was not some imaginary mission. Somebody thought, let's try this. This is Lord Chaitanya's order. My name will be chanted in every town and village. Prabhupada says, I have no qualifications, but I've taken this risk just to carry out the order of divine grace. I depend fully on their mercy so far away from Vrindavan. So, by the strong desire of the holy name that Lord Gauranga will spread throughout all the countries in the Western world and all the towns and cities and villages of the earth, from all the oceans, seas, rivers, and streams, everyone will chant the holy names of Krishna. That is Krishna consciousness. That was the desire of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is what Srila Prabhupada executed. Yes, other persons had come. Other persons had brought different messages. But only Srila Prabhupada brought the sublime message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and kept it intact, the purity of the message intact. And at the mercy of Mahaprabhu, in all directions, there will be a flood of transcendental ecstasy all over the land. Prabhupada commented, although my Guru Maharaj ordered me to accomplish this mission, I'm not worthy or fit to do it. I'm very fallen and insignificant. Therefore, O Lord, now I'm begging your mercy that I may become worthy of you, for you are the wisest and most experienced of all. And then he ends the poem, today that remembrance of you came to me in a very nice way. Because I had a great longing, I called for you. I am your eternal servant, and therefore I desire your association so much, O Lord Krishna, except for you there is no means of devotion. So sometimes we are finding ourselves being challenged and distracted on our chanting. How is that? You know, we have to, Prabhupada explained, we have to call out with some feeling. And that's what Prabhupada did, you know, calling for Krishna. I'm your eternal servant. I desire your association so much, O Lord Krishna, except for you, there is no means of success. So after a 35-day journey from Calcutta, the Jaladutta reached the Commonwealth Pier in Boston. So just this last weekend, I was in Boston. We were celebrating this 60th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's arrival in Boston. It was a big affair. I don't know exactly how many people, but it was, you know, several hundred and then up until at least 1,000 at one point. So at 5:30 a.m., September 17th, 1965, the ship was to stop briefly in Boston before going on to New York. And among the first things Prabhupada saw in America was a globe. It was an advertisement that A&P printed on the pier front on a warehouse. And he saw that, you know, the waterfront revealed the dawn was there. And he saw that there were the ships in the harbor. He saw the other fish-related industry stands along the distance of the skyline. So he had to pass through the immigration and the customs in Boston. And his visa was allowing him a 3-month stay. So he got his official stamp. And then Captain Pandya invited Prabhupada to take a walk around Boston. And the captain had to do some shopping. So they walked across the footbridge into the commercial area. There were old churches, there were warehouses, there were office buildings, and, you know, bars, night bookshops. And he brought him to the shopping area, and there was an escalator. You all know an escalator, right? So he's bringing Prabhupada up to the escalator, and Prabhupada's standing, and he didn't know what to make of it. And so he was, just step on it, you'll go up, you know, they step it in, he almost fell, so Captain Pandya captured him. So, you know, he briefly observed the city. But the most significant thing about his short stay in Boston, aside from the fact that he now stepped foot officially in America, that he wrote another Bengali poem entitled Markani Bhagavat Dharma, teaching Krishna consciousness in America. And of course there was that famous verse, Lord Krishna, I'm like a puppet in your hands. If you like, make me dance, make me dance. Sometimes devotees like to mimic that phrase, and they would say, oh, Prabhupada, I'm simply your puppet. And Prabhupada said, yes. Because, you know, puppets are, yes, I want you to dance this way, but you are dancing that way. Anyway, this was a quite condensed overview. But in Boston, we had a festival began on Friday, and Maha, Harinam, Kirtan. And then on Saturday, early in the morning, they couldn't have the festival in the temple because the temple was just too small, but on the street behind, there was a very nice church, ancient church, old church, and they allow other people to rent the space. So we were having Mangal Arati there, and memories of Prabhupada from devotees who had been there at that time. And on that same day, so that was carrying on, but then in the evening there was a very big program at There was a very big program at MIT. If you know that place, MIT is a big place. So, myself, Radhamaswamy, Anutama, and then two people associated with MIT who were favorable to the movement. So we were speaking. And later there was, a very nice prasadam distribution. I have to say, they outdid themselves when it came to the prasadam. No choli. Everything was just super well prepared. And if you had a diet that you couldn't accommodate, they would make sure you had something that would accommodate your diet. It was super excellent hospitality on the side of the temple. And then on Sunday, that was the day that we all got on the boat. They'd hired I've been on this before. They would hire a boat, and we bring Prabhupada on the boat and go around Boston Harbor. This time the boat was at least almost 4 times as large. It was a very large boat this time. And all of the Prabhupada disciples were asked to say something, and for some reason I was the first one that requested to speak. And I was looking around at everybody, but I was recalling one of the earlier festivals when we brought Prabhupada on the boat. And I don't know what the name of the boat was, but they had printed banners, Jaladuta. And they hung the banners over the side of the boat so you couldn't see what was actually the name of the boat. And the thing is, in the Boston Harbor, it's very strictly controlled. So there's a manifesto of every boat that's in that harbor. So we're floating, we're going around, we're having arti, we're throwing the petals in the water and, chanting and Hari Boling. And suddenly we hear this, huge, cut the ends of Jaladuta, cut your ends of Jaladuta. What's going on, And we see this official boat coming right at us. Cut your engines! And we just turn it off. And I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe because we're throwing the flower petals. And I wanted to clean it up. Nobody could imagine what was the problem. The problem was the Jaladuta wasn't in the manifesto. So they were, guns ready. So we had to pull up our little banner and explain our situation. Anyway, that day the ship was plying smoothly, our little, not so little ship with all the devotees, wonderful kirtan, wonderful memories were being shared. Wonderful prasadam again was honored on the boat. And then later there was a program in the temple, and Prabhupada Swami was speaking about Srila Prabhupada, and Radhanath Swami was there, I was there, other devotees were there. The temple had a little more room because up until then, everything we needed for the program was packed into the temple, but now the program was toward the end, so you literally couldn't walk in the front door without meeting a big box, so things are straightened out. So it was a very beautiful ending to a beautiful program. And the next one, they have it every year. They coordinate it with Rath Yatra. But 60th was a milestone, and probably a few of us will be taking our leaves in the coming year and the coming years. And pretty soon it's just going to be all of you left to carry on. At one point, we'll be celebrating the 100th year anniversary. And maybe some of you in the room might still be around for that. Hopefully you will, and hopefully you'll have here a celebration, not here in this building, hopefully in that other building. And hopefully it will be a grand celebration. and will attract the hearts and minds of many, many more fallen and conditioned souls. What is a fallen and conditioned soul? It means somebody who's disconnected from Krishna or from God, can be from Christ, from Allah. Somebody who has no connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's a fallen and conditioned soul. And Prabhupada came to capture us all and give us a direction in life and a meaning in life and how to do it. Arti started, we'll finish here, and thank you very much. Hare Krishna. No time for discussion because it's time to glorify Krishna through his Arti.
Yes, Malati Prabhu ki.
Jai.
We'll all stand up, we'll put the mats in the back of the door and then put the chairs outside.
Can I help you?
Long time no see. Krishna, Hare Krishna.